and welcome to the Wednesday Night War preview. I'm Adam Wilbourn from WhatCulture, joined by the Dadley Boyz of WhatCulture, Michael Hamblett and Michael Sidgwick, here to preview tonight's episode of NXT and AEW Dynamite. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts, where we not only review the Wednesday Night War, but also Raw and SmackDown pay-per-views. We have interviews, roundtable discussions, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But as I said, I'm here to preview the Wednesday Night War with Michael Hamblett and Michael Sidgwick. Week 2, how do you see this one going in terms of the ratings? Because obviously a dominant victory for AEW Dynamite last time around, although arguably both shows put out phenomenal content.
Yes, I agree. Both shows were excellent. I enjoyed them in very different ways. I think unless some MLB interference happens, both shows will not reach the heights that they did last week. Mm-hmm. There's a curiosity factor with AEW, and there was the fact that they ran essentially a mini takeover over in NXT. I think NXT will continue to plummet, in my opinion. Clearly, the card isn't as stacked as it was last week. They didn't really build some confrontations, if not angles, with real emotional hooks. Who knows if that'll pay off? I personally don't think it will. I think there's a big curiosity factor with AEW that won't quite be the same, but I'm predicting AEW will continue to have 1 million plus viewers, because I think 400,000 drop is too much realistically. I think they did a good enough job of retaining the lion's share of that. NXT could drop to 700,000, given the relative weakness of this week's card.
Yeah, I don't really disagree with that. I think we'll be looking at the percentage gap again, and I think it'll be fairly similar to last week's. Both numbers will drop. As much as I would love to see a takeover quality show from NXT again, it's hard this week. So like last week, you were having conversations where it was a 9 out of 10 show versus a 9.5 or something like that. I sense this week, just looking at the previews of both shows, unanimously, AEW will probably win the week from a quality point of view. Mm-hmm. NXT, for the first time since it's moved to USA, needs to surprise and needs to shock. And we're only on week 2 of the head-to-head war, whereas AEW's card on paper looks like as stacked and arguably better than last week.
Whilst I'm inclined to agree with both of you on this one, is there any chance that potentially NXT has a bit of an upswing in terms of the fact that people who've sampled AEW and maybe not seen NXT prior to, an AEW Dynamite's debut, that people go, oh, well, I've given AEW a chance. This week, I'll see what NXT has to offer and maybe watch AEW after that. I
mean, absolutely. The ratings on these Thursdays are going to be almost as fascinating as all our excitement for the shows on the Wednesdays. I think you're going to be able to. It's going to take 2 weeks to spot the first set of trends, and then it's going to take another 2 or 3 weeks to spot prevailing trends and prevailing viewer habits and patterns. We haven't been exposed to quarter hours as much as we used to be in the old days of Raw and Nitro, because it's really interesting when Dave Meltzer used to break down who was dictating, who was changing channels, and I think that's going to be quite nice if we can ever see quite who are the breakout stars of these ratings wars. But yeah, I mean, NXT last week was so good that if there was a fan that was on the fence but were happy with what they were served, there's no reason why they won't come back. I can't see them telling their friends who watched AEW, oh, this is what you missed out on. That AEW fan thinking, oh yeah, you're right, I should skip from that. I can't see the AEW fan switching over to NXT. Mm-hmm. I can just see maybe a few less people watching any wrestling in general. One
major issue you did point out, which has been reported in the news today, could be centering around baseball and TNT, and as a result of that, AEW Dynamite. If you're unaware, basically there's some major baseball playoff games. As you can probably tell, I'm not exactly an expert on this sort of thing, but if they overrun, they will be put on TNT, and AEW Dynamite will be pushed backwards. Could that affect the ratings?
I mean, if you're a pro wrestling fan and you are in the mindset to watch pro wrestling at a certain time and it's not delivered to you, logic might dictate that you'd go straight over to NXT. But one thing that I've noticed from the ratings pattern, and I think we all have because it's been such a big focal point of conversation, is that there are very different demographics watching these two products. And given how antithetical NXT often is to WWE's main roster, it's the same audience, the 50 plus. Who knows if that teenage demographic will gravitate towards NXT on the basis of a preemption, but at the same time, there's way more competition than there is in the teenage demographic than there is for the 50+. 50+ guys are probably more set in their ways. They're not going to idly scroll through Twitter or go on, YouTube or whatever, whereas that teenage demographic, realistically, has got way more to worry about.
We've talked about what could be detrimental to AEW's ratings. Will this week, Hell in a Cell, Raw, etc., affect NXT, even though they are, as you mentioned, a separate product?
Yes, absolutely, yes, it will. There was such a distinct lack of faith in WWE to do anything right after not just Hell in a Cell, but a dreadful follow-up on Monday Night Raw. And this is, to be fair, WWE can use their promotional muscle for good for NXT, but this is the other side of that. This is the side where NXT, unfortunately, have to absorb the fallout from two terrible shows. I think Sidgwick on our Raw podcast referred to it as like a sort of almost like a toxicity that spews across the whole company, and NXT can't escape that, sadly. What I would be interested to see this week, because of the potential baseball interjection, was I like how both companies would tell you publicly, now we're only really concentrating on our own product. Like, secretly, maybe they are watching the other monitor, and if AEW was to be preempted, if we could then potentially look at the NXT card and think, have they shuffled something in
like
front?
Front-loaded,
Have they front-loaded it again like they did last week, just to take advantage of the viewers that maybe sat there on TNT waiting and thinking, well, we'll just see what's happening in NXT, I suppose. And then Walter Ricochet is out front in the first 10, 15 minutes or something. So it'd be quite cool to analyse that afterwards, because I do think, NXT will be disadvantaged this week. It's mad to draw a line between the end of Hell in a Cell and, let's say, the return of Tommaso Ciampa to challenge Adam Cole. But, we know that Triple H and Vince McMahon are closely associated with all of it, and I think enough fans are educated enough now to be aware of that.
We will get on to AEW soon, but let's talk about NXT.
Always look how you look at me when you say that. Like reassurance.
Yeah,
I like that.
Got to balance things out. Let's talk about a couple of people that you mentioned there. Finn Balor and Tommaso Ciampa. Will they be followed up on this week, and how will WWE do that, do you think?
I really hope so. The NXT card this week is very lean in terms of matches. And obviously the big criticism has been that it's just match. There's not been enough in the way of angles and promos so far. And I would have no problem with Finn Balor cutting quite a powerful, evocative return to NXT promo beyond what he said last week. He's beloved in Full Sail. He immediately looks 10 foot tall compared to this guy getting bantered around on Monday Night Raw. And I think given 5-10 minutes in the ring to start the show, to send a message to Adam Cole, to a mission statement, whatever it is, the reason why he's back. Maybe even, I know Cedric will hate this, but maybe even a guy walks out on the ramp and challenges into his first match, and then you've got your match set up for next week between Finn Balor and somebody he's never faced on NXT before, a heel.
Can't we remember the Undisputed Era?
Yeah, Roderick Strong or something like that. There's plenty of guys there that can have fresh matches with Finn Balor. Tommaso Ciampa, I would like them to hold back on a little bit. The network are running a He's Been Gone documentary just before NXT tonight. The name escapes me now, but you're going to see lots of hospital footage of him, he's recovering with his young child and things like that. Huge baby face, but I think you are in danger of diluting the pair of them if you bring them up together at the same time. And I think Ciampa's the one at the moment. It was telling that he was on last. He was the real featured NXT guy, even more so than Finn Balor. And I think they want to keep him for a takeover title match, and they'll probably race to that a little bit sooner with Finn.
I think the pattern that has emerged on NXT is a weird lack of trust in the talent. They are not allowing them to cut promos, scripted or otherwise. Well, it would only be scripted. And they are apparently, per reports, making them rehearse the entire show on a Tuesday, which baffles me, because if there's one thing that brand doesn't need, it's a sense of rigid, solid, preparation. I think on that basis, they will instead lean not on the writing staff or Balor himself, but they will lean on their incredible expert video production department and run a really evocative, emotional career retrospective video to promote his return more so than a in-the-ring angle. But that's just my cynicism possibly bleeding through.
Another big moment we had last week was, of course, Shayna Baszler retaining her NXT Women's Championship. What do you see next for her? Is it as straightforward as Rhea Ripley, or are they going to go around the houses a little bit more and hold off on that match akin to a Tommaso Ciampa match?
I don't know. I think Rhea Ripley is the way to go immediately, because it presents such a stark and great contrast to Candice LeRae, and indeed virtually every other opponent against which Baszler's excelled. She's great as the bully, just toying with the emotions of the crowd who are in support of these great baby faces. She's had great matches with, like Kairi Sane and Candice LeRae. I think narratively it makes so much sense now, especially given that she's already defeated Candice LeRae, who best epitomizes that certain character. Rhea Ripley's like the perfect intensification of that kind of character arc. So yeah, give me Baszler versus Ripley now, because that formula, I think the ratings turned it off as well. Wasn't it Shayna Baszler turned a lot of people off NXT?
Yes.
Yes. So I think there's
inexplicable that for me.
It is, but at the same time, we have seen this exact story played out very well and very differently, but the overtones have been the same quite a lot. I think Rhea Ripley is necessary to freshen up that character and the dynamic that she has with her opponents.
It's a very different beast having somebody that they would present as Shayna's equal, isn't it, at the moment? And I think the only other person I would say, and it's a bit like with Johnny Gargano last week, they've been very patient so far in the USA era with Bianca Belair, and I think she's there as a weapon for them. She's we used to say main roster ready star, but we don't say that anymore. She's a TV ready star, and NXT is a TV show, and I would like to see Bianca Belair in a singles match. Again, I quite like NXT's functional building of stars. So Bianca Belair in like a 7 or 8 minute squash, if she's going to be teed up as another challenger for Shayna Baszler, they've got the advantage of the matches they've had before to tell the story of what she's got wrong and what she might do right the next time. So you could have her just destroy one of the horsewomen in one of their first singles matches while Shayna patrols the outside of the ring or something like that. There's enough talent there that they've actually held onto thus far, considering we're actually 4 weeks into the USA Network period for the show, that she's somebody that I think has kept a relatively low profile. There is, of course, Io Shirai, but you sense that it's going to take a babyface to transition the title onto her, because they went about as far as they could with Io and Shayna back when Io was a babyface.
A couple of matches advertised for NXT this week, one of them being Walter versus Kushida, R.I.P. Kushida's chest. How do you see this one going? Because it's not for the title, it's building towards something one would assume.
Can I just interject for this one? Because this match best illustrates my problem with NXT. And when I say problem, I'm not being a pedantic little tosser, right? This is a problem akin to having Cristiano Ronaldo and Leo Messi in the same team. It's a nice problem to have, but it still poses a problem. Walter Kushida is going to be an incredible match because Walter is obviously a colossus. Kushida is a smaller technician. There's going to be great drama in the idea of Walter just physically dominating Kushida, but Kushida is so unbelievably skilled. It's so many different facets of pro wrestling that his counters and everything else are going to make for incredible drama. But despite all this, the great dynamic, the great sense of ring styles that will make sense in this context of this great, great pairing, I could not give a single toss about who wins. That emotional core is just not there whatsoever. Maybe they'll build it in the match. Maybe Walter will be so disgusting and so physical that you'll be just compelled to get behind Kushida in the context of the match. But the way it's been built, it's just, as yet, I don't care.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, actually. I sense that in match they've got a chance of powering through and drawing a reaction from me and maybe other fans that are not necessarily feeling this pairing beyond what it looks like to see those two wrestlers next to each other. Kushida winning to earn himself a title shot is perfectly fine and logical pro wrestling booking, and it's certainly not like WWE to book a non-finish to get themselves out of a corner. So, there's every chance that in response to that Hell in a Cell finish, they will feel like they absolutely have to deliver something. The prospect this week in particular of Kushida having Walter beat and Imperium running in for the disqualification is unthinkable. Even if that was on Triple H's a mood board for this week's NXT, after Sunday and Monday, he's got to think, I've got to deliver a finish here. I do worry about how they book Kushida to convincingly beat Walter without actually damaging Walter. So in that regard, the stakes are high, and yet it doesn't feel like a particularly big deal. My worry is that Walter just wins, and then this was a false dawn for Kushida completely. I do feel like there is a title match, a hot title match at that, but I'm worried about how they're going to get there.
Another match we are seeing is for another title on NXT, the Cruiserweight Championship. Drew Gulak defending against Lio Rush. This could be an absolute banger.
I'm more excited about this one in that it's impossible to work out what it's going to look like going in. This is the NXT Cruiserweight title now. This is, again, feeling like it's got to be a mission statement match. It's in the building where the Cruiserweight Classic took place. The origin, the beautiful origin of that belt and what we all thought this could be. A Cruiserweight division divorced from WWE's version of Cruiserweight wrestling. And I think we all saw it in Lio Rush's re-debut on NXT. It felt immediately like that was the Leo Rush that, controversial as he may have been, was the one that was signed for WWE all that time ago. And I want to see, I don't care about the psychology in this one. I like Drew Gulak for what he brings to 205 Live's version of the Cruiserweight division, but that's not the Drew Gulak I need here. Like, this has just got to pop. This has got to get people talking, much the same way Matt Riddle and Adam Cole did.
I think Drew Gulak is absolutely fantastic, and had this be just another championship match on TV, I'd be inclined to suggest he would retain. But considering we had 3 championship matches last week that all the title didn't change hands, could you see the title changing hands tonight?
Yes, absolutely. Leo Rush to me feels more marketable as a star. He's way more of an exciting talent than Drew Gulak is. So I could see a title change imminent. And what I also like to see is, I like this version of Drew Gulak, but like the other version was so much more entertaining for me. He's a guy who stared down the lens with this great deadpan pun. Says, I call this move the Gulak. And he was just really entertaining, really charismatic. Like, he played it as a dog, which probably isn't like thematically consistent with this NXT, but I just thought it was like way more entertaining. So I liked him more before he reverted to serious wrestler Gulak. So I would possibly like to see a return to that.
And you could free him up for facing Matt Riddle, etc., etc. Rerunning that sort of thing would be really good.
I think it's a better TV character than the one he has now. And NXT needs better TV characters.
They have an opportunity to do something here as well. Like, obviously, we've talked about all the ways in which Dynamite, like, stylistically might have borrowed from Nitro because of the TNT links and everything like that. One of Nitro's big strengths was always a cruiserweight match, even if you weren't invested in the characters, that would keep viewers hooked because you just couldn't look away. If NXT could establish one of them a week guaranteed, it's a great, unique selling point, because AEW's card is probably going to be more diverse week on week, but that becomes like a real safe guarantee. Well, NXT is going to give you this 10-minute banger. Again, pick a match at random out of the Cruiserweight Classic, and it's probably going to entertain you. It'd be great if NXT could promise that over a 2-hour broadcast once a week.
Let's transition over to AEW Dynamite then. Lots of matches advertised for this.
Too many.
But before we get into those...
It's too big.
Will we see an appearance from Jake Hager and the likes of Santana and Ortiz after their... Because obviously Jericho and Sammy Guevara are in a match after that shocking conclusion to Dynamite last week?
Yes, there was a clip broadcast on the post show on Twitter in which an interviewer approached Jericho and his new posse, whatever they're called, and said, have you got an explanation for what happened? And I think Hager knocked the camera out the hand that he could hear off camera, you'll get it next week. So surely you need your world champion, your 10 out of 10 on any era talker, Chris Jericho, to explain why these people are together, what their plans are going forward, anything. I'd love to see Chris Jericho break out a little bit of the bubbly and just go after the heels win in that big tag team match, like a spray down of the beaten baby faces, just something to put over this new version of Chris Jericho beyond he's a legend from another company. He happens to be our world champion. I want to see the version of Chris Jericho that he's invented for himself transposed to TNT. So yes, I'd like to see Jake Hager kick the crap out of Dustin Rhodes, because I think that's a really unusual dynamic. Like a shredded powerhouse, totally renewed in his confidence, somehow looks like a star, even though he never really was, against the sentimental old dog favourite that AEW has. It's completely different component of storytelling to what NXT has. It's not necessarily... It'll be like a gentleman's 3 of a match, but it'll be kind of loaded with like an emotional hook. So yes, I would love to see Jake Hager tonight.
I can't help but feel, and agree with Sidgwick here, feel that Hangman Page and Dustin Rhodes are sort of lambs to the slaughter against Jericho and Guevara.
Yeah, Hangman Page turning heel feels like AEW's first big shocker of an angle. Whether or not they save that for Full Gear, where he can make the most impact in turning, whether to join Jericho or just simply to turn on Cody for feeling a bit betrayed by his start to life in AEW so far, I don't know. But a defeat here keeps that one going. They've already had a bit of a dust up and a pull apart on being the elite. So it's all being, like, the groundwork is being laid for that. It's a bit match heavy this week, but Tony Khan hates backstage vignettes anyway. And one of the, like, time sinks last week was all that rubbish with Jay and Silent Bob. So if anything, if you'd have donated 5 more minutes to MJF's match or promo, or there was probably a better way to use some of the time on last week's show anyway. So if one of these matches is cut short, it's probably not the end of the world. I think personally, for my money, it's Moxley and Sean Spears. Like, keep that as short as it needs to be. There is absolutely no harm in, like, Sean Spears barely getting a hope spot before he gets nailed with a Death Rider. John Moxley is an animal. You know, he shouldn't be out there too long, unless we're not talking G1 New Japan John Moxley at the moment, like find out his wrestler's weakness. We're talking about this guy that just drove somebody through a glass table. He's, I don't want to use one of his old T-shirt catchphrases, but he is unhinged at the moment. You know, this is that guy. Kenny Omega can go out and do 20-minute matches all day long, but that's not Moxley's MO. So I think that's where you save the time this week.
Will Omega get involved in this Spears-Moxley match, considering what happened last week?
I don't know, because considering what happened last week is that they did deliver a clean finish and then the angle ensued. Tony Khan has gone on record several times saying that he hates disqualification finishes, so I don't think it's best to look through it through that particular lens. I think Moxley clearly goes over Sean Spears. No other result makes sense. And I think you'll see possibly a backstage retribution attack afterwards. But I would love to see Moxley get like just at least a minute of post-match promo. What I loved last week, but I didn't get, was the tease of how they're going to do the interview format and the promo format. They had Tony Schiavone stick a mic in Cody's hand. There was an angle that put pay to that. You almost got an SAU promo by the entrance with Tony Schiavone again. And I love that old Nitro adjacent feeling of, you're not just giving a guy a microphone to perform a rehearsed soliloquy. You're getting like an athlete's like thoughts on the match he's just had by an interviewer in a sporting context. So that's the kind of promo format I would love to see fleshed out more tonight.
I realise I'm incredibly biased when I ask this question because he's friend of the channel, but would someone not like Chris Van Vliet be ideal in that sort of role? I realise obviously the legendary status of the likes of Tony Schiavone, but if you keep him behind the commentary desk, and Chris Van Vliet, who everyone knows has had these fantastic interviews with these wrestlers.
He's there.
Yeah, exactly. If you transition that into doing, if you give that role to him, obviously he was there just chatting to Jay and Silent Bob last week.
Well, either or. I'd love to see Chris Van Vliet do that. Somebody, anybody in that format of, because that's what they do like in sports, and this is the sports league. Like you see backs like after a Premier League game in front of the advertising boards, you've got an interviewer giving an interview to one of the athletes and he gives us extemporaneous thoughts on it. I'd love to see that because they've got the best roster of talkers since, I would say, the year 2001. Because from 2002 onwards, WWE's always had some great talkers, but they were never like unfiltered. It was not like staring fire down the lens for 2 minutes. I think it would be a shock and waste if they don't at least like tell people you're going to see more of this once we have to do less blockbuster stuff in this early launch period.
I was going to say, I'm going to tick off my own box on Sidgwick's bingo here, but to take an element of New Japan, but just with an added English interviewer as part of it.
Yes, absolutely. The press conference style or the post-match, that's the format I want to see fleshed out.
What's so cool about that as well is that it's the total opposite to WWE guys being sent out there with a bad script, having to talk for 20 minutes with nothing to say. This is such an advantageous position for the wrestlers. They have to reference what's just happened, and then the interview steers them onto what's happening next. None of it's wasted, is it? You know, it's like, how was it beating that guy, and what are you going to do when you face that guy? Which just is so joined up, and it just puts a wrestler, even if it's a wrestler who's not one of those great talkers, if it's a bit of a rabbit in the headlights guy, there's something going on there that's going to keep them on track.
A slightly controversial thing coming out of AEW recently is, of course, this number one contenders match between Darby Allin and Jimmy Havoc. Obviously, the argument can be made that there are other people who should be in this position, although the counter to that would be, of course, if you've got Pac versus Jericho or Pac in a title match, you kind of want to save that for a pay-per-view probably. But, having said all that, Darby Allin versus Jimmy Havoc, who should be the number one contender and go ahead to face Chris Jericho on TV?
Darby Allin, because with respect to Jimmy Havoc, the value of this roster, in my opinion at the moment, is its diversity. For all that Cody and Jericho are big stars and warrant headlining the pay-per-view, the magic at the moment is in the likes of a Chris Jericho versus Darby Allin. The magic's in this tag match of Chris Jericho teaming up with Sammy Guevara. There are so many different combinations that feel like a Joey Janela dream card where he's managed to release a load of megastar wrestlers. You know, and I think like that's what Dynamite can be used for. I accept that the pay-per-view, as much as they're going to try and cling to the data and the wins and losses, and I'll let Sidgwick get the whiteboard out to do the maths on why this match makes sense. But like, as much as I think they'll try and do that to justify, well, really, we need to put Cody in the main event because he sells tickets, not because of wins and losses. TV, you can absolutely go out of your way to find excuses to put guy A that you've never heard of versus biggest star in wrestling. I think there's weeks and months of those matches to happen. I think even a Jake Hager like brings that, by being a WWE refugee. You know, like the Jake Hager versus a guy that's half his size, but that can work circles around him, provides something different, you know, provides something visual. Dustin Runnels is the old dog against these young pups that he just can't keep up with. And yeah, with respect to Jimmy Havoc, he's more of a niche wrestler that can have outstanding, really, really fun, entertaining matches. But Darby Allin against Cody Rhodes proved that he can hang as a very sympathetic figure against an established guy, and the chemistry of Jericho feels impeccable.
I have to echo Hamlet's sentiments exactly, marking the first time we've agreed on AEW thus far. What I love about this promotion so far is really the promise more so than the delivery, but what I love specifically is that tiered roster. It's got brand new, incredibly young talents. It's got guys in their prime, and it's got the seasoned, sentimental veterans like Shayna and Dustin Rhodes. Realistically, you could get the perfect TV matches, which is why I'm not going to slaughter them for ignoring Pac, because it's a business sense, makes perfect sense. Storyline sense within the parameters of their fictional universe, it doesn't really make sense. I can get past that initially. But realistically, with the complexion of the roster as it is, you could realistically have an Undertaker versus Jeff Hardy ladder match style match every single week on TV with a clear, predictable winner, but with such an emotional core to it and such a great showcase performance that they can get over in defeat. I think they've managed the complexion of the roster perfectly, and Darby Allin versus Chris Jericho is the perfect launch to that new kind of storytelling.
Yeah, that's the kind of response that I had to all these protestations. As much as I agree that, you know, Pac's 2-0, I think, in AEW now, and should obviously be in and around the title picture. Well, yeah, but if you're complaining about that as a WWE fan, what's the United States Open Challenge to you? That we all knew John Cena, for the most part, was going to retain. It was just a case of getting over other stars by putting them in the ring with him. But let's move on and talk about the first round of the tag title tournament. Young Bucks versus Private Party. Could there be an upset on the cards here because of the way that they maybe want to structure this tournament?
Brother, who's running the territory? the Young Bucks are going to win this. But again, it's a similar kind of use of that complexion of the roster. They're going to be taken to the limit. They're going to possibly tell a story in which Private Party have got the jump on them because they're younger, they're a new breed of athlete influenced by the Young Bucks. They could completely overhaul even the Young Bucks with their new state-of-the-art offense. Maybe the Young Bucks can resort to some heel tactics. That would be nice because they're way better as heels as they are baby faces, but ultimately their veteran instincts and class will overcome. The story writes itself. They'll do moves that will tell the story in a way that I've not seen in that combination. It's all logical booking that'll be so exciting and dramatic that the predictability of the result does not matter.
Yeah, I think it's fireworks in the match and then handshakes and hugs at the end, as much as I would like the Young Bucks to be dicks, because I think for me, bizarrely enough, I think most of the elite babyfaces are one day going to work out as better heels in AEW, but you've laid out your big angle of Jericho and the baddies versus the elite as the good guys, so we can't get there yet. Otherwise, this would have made a great tournament final. So I do think the Young Bucks advance, but they are going to work. And this is the benefit of having the Young Bucks and Kenny as EVPs. Kenny, you're kind of seeing it with the Joshi wrestlers, and the Young Bucks, presumably with the tag division. They're going to see that as their job and the thing that they want to be, this is their proving ground almost. It's going to be their job to get these talents over, even when they're winning. And I feel like this is going to be a Private Party showcase that the Young Bucks are almost passengers for. It's the first time they're going to look like veterans of this style that they've innovated. And I don't think it'll be too long. I don't think there'll be a moment to breathe. It won't be a psychological classic, but it'll look fantastic.
One of the big highlights from AEW Dynamite last week was, of course, Riho being crowned their inaugural AEW Women's Champion. She's in tag action this week alongside Britt Baker, taking on Bea Priestley and Emi Sakura. How is this going to play into the women's title picture?
Well, I haven't watched AEW Dark yet, but the match I was most interested on from that show, of all things, was the women's tag team match that featured Bea Priestley and Britt Baker on either side, because it feels like something they've been quite loyal to as a storyline since pretty much post Double or Nothing, when certain women's wrestlers disappeared and they slotted other ones in. And I just think that, for all that the reviews coming out of that are not great, I am quite keen on seeing these two fight now on a bigger stage. Britt Baker's not yet. Has she not proved herself, or has she not been given a chance to prove herself? Either way, you draw a line under that tonight. Because if this doesn't impress, I think you have to say, well, Riho and Nyla Rose knocked it out the park last week, so go in that direction rather than going with the guys that theoretically plan to push that have maybe just not worked out quite as well.
My worry with this one is looking ahead to next week. Riho defends her title. against an as yet undetermined opponent, they kind of have to build that match within this match, which makes me think there's possibly scope for an angle where Britt Baker and Bea Priestley, the animosity is so much that they end up brawling outside of the ring, leaving Riho vulnerable to a roll-up and a defeated champion, and it's Sakura versus Riho next week, which is a very WWE way to do it, but because it's AEW, I will instead compare it to a New Japan way of doing it, and they do this on tags all the time, but no, I don't think it's a very good look. If I'm going to do, and this will happen for a while, I will be unabashed about it, I will do headcanon. Oh, it's all right because it's AEW. Because that company, and this feeds into an actual point, not just my personal bias, has got this currency with the fan base where they're willing to look beyond any errors. Riho is as sympathetic as all hell. Like she proved it last week in an absolutely wonderful, wonderful, raw as hell match where the Bugs were features. It was great. If she gets beaten after last week's high, maybe on a character level, that'll get the fans to invest in it all the more. If you look at it away from the optics of that's a titled WWE trope. If you look at it as a character thing and looking at the way they can forge a connection further with the public, maybe this is the way to go. But it's either this or they'll just transplant anyone from that. Well, Ali is going to be her opponent. You know, it just feels like this match exists for a reason.
Awesome Kong, because it'd be class.
Oh, my God, man.
They're
waiting to do something of significance with her, I think.
Yeah,
They're not beating her just yet.
Especially after watching last week, you can know how great that match would be. It's worthy of a pay-per-view,
Yes.
isn't it? Like Rio and Awesome Kong. Yeah, I think that at the moment, we have to try and judge the women's division like under the same parameters that we just discussed the men's division, but it's slightly tougher because I would say the established stars aren't quite as established. There isn't really a Chris Jericho or a Dustin Rhodes or a Cody Rhodes or that type of character. So there is. It's
just Cody. He's not working off his dad's name anymore.
It's slightly less tiered. Brandy Rhodes is the headliner and then there's everybody else. And I just think that like Riho was so great last week, so good, immediately believable as a women's champion when all of us predicted Nyla Rose. That I'd fear for that finish because I think it's too soon to pin your champion when she's looked like such an underdog. I think you run the risk of taking a lot of the magic from last week's win if you do a roll-up finish in a tag match.
Well, either way, a very, very exciting night for both shows, in my opinion, and anything to get the taste away from Monday Night Raw and Hell in a Cell in my book. But let us know your predictions for tonight in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
All elite Wilbourn.
And subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus, you can tweet ours at WhatCulture WWE. Watch there, follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
I am the best at Twitter. Sorry, David Starr. At M Sidgwick.
You can follow me at Adam Wilbourn. Follow us all, as I said, at WhatCulture WWE. Enjoy the Wednesday Night War. Whoever you're rooting for, you should root for both because they're both great. And join us tomorrow.
I didn't believe that, Adam Elite Wrestling.
Join us tomorrow for the Wednesday Night War review. My thanks to the Dadley Boyz. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.